Alright, so here we have Chapter 10 project. On day 3, of course, if you had your doctor's folder and you grab it, you'd make sure that you've completed all the tasks associated with researching your article. And those tasks of researching article include, just a review, it would be reading over your article and completing questions associated with the article. It would be summarizing your article, and then summarizing it at the very bottom based on what you think its main ideas about it, what you remember as the most important ideas from each paragraph. You would have completed this box right here. And just as a reminder, you can come to right here to see an example of this done. So if you want to see a Down syndrome example of how to complete that table, it's right here. And for this, again, this is available on the day 2 posting on Google Classroom, but it explains how you can fill out each little box to show comparisons or contrast between the different steps. And if you need a more detailed example of how to complete this and how to compare info from part 2 through 6 with part 9, which is the article, if you need help doing that, then just click on the video here, and the video walks you through it. Alright, on this part of the task where you're filling out the box, the final thing says 5-sentence paragraphs to inform the reader on your genetic disorder and research showing connection between parents, family history, and your patient. Let's make this a little bigger. There you go. Okay, so your goal down here is to write a 5-sentence paragraph to inform your reader on your genetic disorder and the research showing a connection between your parents' family history and your patient. What does this mean? Well, you've identified your patient's syndrome. So you can relate what you've identified as your patient's syndrome to how you think your parents or your patient's parents might have contributed to that patient inheriting the syndrome. So when you read your article, you learned about how smoking or old age could relate to causing problems for the sex cells, that they could have damaged the sex cells or caused meiosis not to happen right. What you want to do now is share ideas from the article and what the article says about how age or smoking can impact sex cells or gametes and just meiosis in general, and you want to relate that to the syndrome you've identified in your patient. Because your syndrome is based on chromosomes and your article shows how chromosomes can be damaged during meiosis, then you have a perfect way to compare and show how they support each other, how those ideas could relate. And you're going to write a 5-sentence paragraph to do this. And if you want a little help connecting those words, then all you got to do is go to Google Classroom, and we have here a website that has some transition words. So if you want to show comparison between the research you've done to identify the syndrome, and you want to show how the syndrome you've diagnosed compares to the article you read, you can just click right here for comparison, and you get a bunch of different words that you could use to show how the research you've done and the diagnosing you've done compares to what you've read in your article. You could say, like for example, you could use similarly. So when you're typing up your paper, you could say, my patient appears to have a genetic syndrome called Down syndrome. And you could say, the patient's family history shows a parent who smoked smoked during the well, before and during pregnancy. Similarly, notice I'm using that transitional word. Similarly, and I'll highlight it in red. Similarly, the article suggests that chemicals in cigarette smoke affects sperm and egg. I'll just put gamete because I want to use my academic language, right? Alright, as you can see, this isn't 5 sentences yet. I've written 1, 2, 3. I would continue to write 2 more. At this point, I might choose to contrast how the research is a little different than what I found or learned about with the diagnosis. So if I want to show contrast, let's pick a contrast word. And so to contrast, I could pick any of these. Right. In contrast, there you go. So we'll use the word, we'll just say, we'll use however. I like however. So however. So we'll say, however, and it doesn't have to be these words I've chosen, right? In fact, these words only make sense based on the sentence structure. If you choose a certain word, you need to make sure it makes sense for how you want to write. I'm making this up as I go. I'm just giving you an example of how you could use these words. I recommend using them if you feel like you should. However, the research article failed to directly link smoking to Down syndrome, but we do know that chromosomes can be damaged. We're going to make this a little smaller. So zoom in on your screen if you need to. By the when exposed to smoke. While we don't know exactly how this happens, we do know that chromosome 21 could... We do know that chromosome 21 is involved in Down syndrome. Our best evidence links the parents' smoking lifestyle to the new knowledge of how smoking is bad for gametes that might eventually lead to pregnancy and children like my patient. So, yes, I did end up writing a little more than 5 sentences, but you can see, I want you to use this as an example to just see how you can connect ideas. I connected what we learned about with chromosome 21. I used a word to show how the research I did in parts 2 through 6 were similar to Part 9, the smoking article I read. I also used the word however to show how Part 2 through 6 and the smoking article are different. Remember, these two sides of the table show similarities between the research you've done and the research article. This side shows contrast, so I wanted to make sure I got a little information from here and a little information here as I finished it. You could have also done this. You could have spoke specifically about what happens to the chromosome. In Down syndrome, the homologous, let's see, the sister chromatids fail to separate, and this might have been due to the parents' use of cigarettes. This represents a hypothesis to explain the relationship between the parents' drug use and the syndrome of our patient. Do you see how this, by writing a second sentence, I'm connecting what we do know about what causes Down syndrome to the fact that our article said that smoking can cause a problem on chromosomes. Now we don't have any proof, it's a hypothesis, and I use that right here. So, it's a hypothesis, an important word for us to use, and I used some more academic words, right? I used sister chromatids, which is very useful when doing this. I recognize the name of the syndrome, which is important. You should talk about it specifically. And again, throughout this whole thing, I've referred to both the article I read and the research I did on parts 2 through 6. And again, parts 2 through 6 is right here. Parts 2 through 6. And in those parts, you should have already used these words. So you should feel comfortable using some of these words when talking about how either old age or cigarette smoke can potentially impact the chromosomes and the syndrome you've diagnosed for your patient. All right, good luck. Now, after you complete that part here, the final thing is to write an overall report. And this overall report is simple because it's just repeating what you've already done. You would say, my patient's symptoms. So look back at your original document. I hypothesized that their syndrome, sorry, let's change this to syndrome, that their syndrome is, for me it was Down syndrome, so I'd write Down syndrome here. After developing ideas on meiosis, the chromosome disorder likely occurred when, well, according to meiosis, the chromosome disorder likely occurred during the second part of cell divisions when two sister chromatids didn't separate in one gamete or egg, received two of the sister chromatids for 21, which was an extra copy of 21, right? Again, you're just reporting on what you've already done and learned. And I'd write that here. See it once you use these same words again. It says, once the parents chose to reproduce, the Punnett square revealed, and because in the Down syndrome example, I could say the mother had an extra chromosome 21, and when the egg was fertilized by the sperm, it transferred to the egg 3 copies rather than 2 of chromosome 21. And then you can say right here. So you're summarizing what you've learned, right? A report is like a conclusion in a 5-sentence paragraph. You're just repeating what you've already done. It says specific parent history, such as were they old or were they smokers, may be responsible based on evidence from the science article titled. So give the article a title or find the title and write it there. It says this article suggests, you just summarizing what did the article report. And then it says based on all the evidence and research, the overall cause of the disorder is, all right, you basically summarize what you wrote here because you're saying right here how the article connects to the syndrome, and then you come up with a hypothesis. So for me, what I could write in that blank was, this represents a hypothesis to explain how the relationship between the parent's drug use and the syndrome of our patient, which was that the sister chromatids failed to separate, and it might be due to the cigarettes. All right, lastly, you'll go on to Learn Genetics Utah.